For the past 2 weeks, there's been an ongoing social media and media smear campaign against Joe Rogan, trying to get him booted off of Spotify. Now, in my opinion, it's kind of stupid of many of these people, considering the massive contract Joe Rogan has with Spotify. They're not going to boot him off. I was told that Joe has stated, because I haven't heard Joe say this, but you know, when I've talked about this on IRL and stuff, people say Joe's mentioned his contract is ironclad, so they can't do anything about it. Doesn't mean much. It really doesn't. Contracts are just pieces of paper. Seriously. Now, the reported deal with Joe and Spotify is $100 million. And if Joe were to get booted off the platform, he'd probably be able to get that plus more. And I'm sure he wouldn't be too upset about it because he can bring his show wherever he wants. The show is him, not Spotify. So Spotify's not likely to give him up. But over on social media, let's get into the nitty gritty. I wake up to 3 different Twitter trends: delete Spotify, cancel Spotify, and Joe Rogan, because people on the left are just insulting him. I don't think that these Twitter leftists, many of which are probably just sock puppet accounts and bots, to be completely honest, I don't think they actually care about Joe Rogan's show. I don't think they actually care about what Joe says or who Joe is. I think the left is a chaotic and destructive force that latches onto things and doesn't let go. They are like fire. It just spreads, it burns, and destroys. But I also think the media pushing these stories, they're concerned. Joe Rogan, podcasting, shows like mine, for instance, are their competition. So any opportunity to shut him down, they will take. I always find it weird talking about Joe Rogan. For one, because I know the guy. And secondly, because it's like, it's a dude who hangs out and talks about stuff. I don't view him as a leader of the free world or anything like that. But when we had him on Timcast IRL, people were commenting that Joe Rogan was the leader of the free world. Isn't that weird? Isn't that crazy? Now, it's not, well, I guess in my opinion, I don't think Joe Rogan is the leader of the free world. I think people are being somewhat facetious and, you know, hyperbolic on purpose. But Joe's show has quickly become one of the most important media platforms in the world. And isn't that crazy? But it's because the media is full of it, because the media lies, because we know they lie. So who are these people desperately trying to defend a decaying and dead news media apparatus? Cult members? Someone pointed out on my Tim Pool Daily Show podcast, they were like, Tim, you referred to these people as city urban liberal types. Did you do that on purpose? Because, of course, that spells out, it's the acronym CULT. And I was like, no, but I will take credit for that. The city urban liberal types don't like Joe Rogan. And it's not because of what Joe says. It's because he allows people to have their opinions. And it started to a great degree with Robert Malone. But here's why I want to talk to you about what's going on today. For one, with a nearly 2 week long, over 2 weeks, that the media has constantly been slamming Joe Rogan, ramping things up. I feel like we need to have a similarly sustained positive campaign in support of Joe. And the reason for this is, guys, I really do think, I don't know what Joe would say about this. I didn't ask him. And I don't know what's physically or legally possible. Do not underestimate the ability of companies to break contracts when they feel threatened. It's a cost-benefit analysis. If the contract with Joe says something like, we will give you $100 million over 3 years to have the Joe Rogan experience. I'm sure it's something like that. I don't know. But, a lot of people mentioned, I think it was the Wall Street Journal said, Joe Rogan got $100 million. That doesn't mean they just handed him a check for $100 million. It's probably a year term of some sort. I don't know what the term is. For all we know, it could be 5. A lot of people are like, $100 million, look how much money you got. It could be a 10-year term. Seriously. I really doubt it, to be completely honest. But for all we know, it was like, we'll give you $10 million a year for 10 years. I really doubt Joe would take that much money, because honestly, it's low for what his show's value is. I'd be willing to bet it was something like 2 years. That's fairly standard in a lot of these, contracts they do. When I worked for Fusion, they wanted me for 3 years. I said 2, and they were like, well, 3 is standard. And I said, no, it isn't. 2 is. 2 years. It's kind of a long time. So I think it's entirely possible. I really do. That if Spotify does the cost-benefit analysis and says, we lost Neil Young, that's 6 million monthly listeners. We're losing tens of thousands of users, because that's what people are saying. They're canceling and deleting Spotify. They're going to weigh the cost and the risks. To be honest, the left would have to mount such an immense pressure campaign to actually overcome that hill. I don't necessarily believe it's likely. but it is possible. If Spotify says, we did this deal with Joe Rogan, we're going to lose $100 million. However, because of the people hating him, we're going to lose $101 million. You know what Spotify would do. They'll say, okay, break the contract, pay Joe his 100, we save him $1 million. That's literally what they would do. They would not risk losing their platform over Joe Rogan. And it's not even necessarily about the $100 million versus whatever Spotify could make. It's about yearly prospects growth and shares. Now, when Joe was signed on to Spotify, their stock skyrocketed. So don't expect them to just dump him anytime soon. But I think it's fair to point out that if there is no effort, if no one who likes his show speaks out and cares, what happens is it's not so much about the money, it's about the culture. If there's a show on TV and there's 10,000 people who won't shut up complaining about it, but no one is speaking out in support of it, the company just says, look, nobody is backing this show. Why are we dealing with this? Because the cost isn't just what we're going to lose from these users. It's the sustained pressure campaign. It's legal. It's PR. It's all of that stacked on top. And if there's no support for the show, I don't care. Of course, Joe's a big show. They can see it in the numbers. But I think it's important to speak out and push back and make sure that there is a narrative that exists that is, Joe Rogan's show is important. Maybe because it's Joe, maybe not, I don't know, but it's a massive platform for a regular guy who embodies regular people to have conversations with varying opinions, whether positive or negative, and allow us to decide for ourselves. I want to show you some stuff. There is a viral post that people are sharing. Michael Malice posted it, and it says that Neil Young sold his music to Hipgnosis, which has a deal with Blackstone, who has invested in a pharmaceutical, biotech therapeutics company. Surprise, surprise. And I see this and I'm like, guys, Blackstone owns everything. It's not that hard to make a tighter connection. So let me show you what I posted on Instagram, but I want to make sure I can be a bit rational and break this down. Over on Instagram, I highlight this story from, I believe it was Rolling Stone. Neil Young sells catalog rights to Mercuriadis's Hipgnosis. It's HIPG. It's hypnosis, but there's a G in there, and the G is silent, I guess. So Hipgnosis founder Mercuriadis bought Young's publishing, promises fans there will be never be a burger of gold fast food commercial. All right. Then we have August 2020. Blackstone announces appointment of Jeffrey B. Kindler, former chairman and CEO of Pfizer, as senior advisor. October 2021. Blackstone and Hipgnosis Song Management launch $1 billion partnership to invest in songs, recorded music, music LP and royalties. Music IP, IP and royalties. And then, finally, January 26. Spotify to pull Neil Young's music after artists' objections to Joe Rogan. The artist had published, then taken down an open letter calling on Spotify to take down his music because of vaccine misinformation from Joe Rogan's podcast. I'm not saying there's a grand conspiracy. It's a story in 4 parts, and 4 parts is quite a bit. You can, are you guys familiar with it? What is it? The 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, that everybody within 6 degrees of contacts is connected to Kevin Bacon. That was the joke. Kevin Bacon, of course, being the movie star. And the idea is, your mom has a friend from college whose cousin married a guy who hung out with Kevin, who knows Kevin Bacon or whatever, like 6 degrees of separation. I don't know why they chose Kevin Bacon for that, but 6 degrees it's so exponentially large that of course you can literally find yourself connected to anybody. You could find out that you are somehow related to some knights of old or something. Yeah, because there were very few people back then. We look back in history and there are very famous individuals, but when there were only 2 million people on the planet, there's a strong likelihood you have some relationship with, one of these historical figures. I want to make sure that's clear, because just because Neil Young's catalog was sold to Hipgnosis, just because Hipgnosis has a deal with Blackstone, just because Blackstone hired the former Pfizer CEO as an advisor, doesn't mean that this is directly involved in why Neil Young is complaining. Neil Young sold the rights. That doesn't explain why Neil Young himself personally would be like, I want my music off, right? But a lot of people pointed something out too on Timcast IRL. They said Neil Young couldn't get his music pulled because he sold the rights to it. Yet here we are, Spotify is pulling the rights to his music. So it's not about Neil Young and what he says, it's about they're actually doing it. Now, I do think there is it is feasible. It is possible, nay, somewhat likely. Not saying greater than 51% chance, but I think it's possible that, Pfizer and, Moderna and these other pharmaceuticals, of course, they've had conversations about Joe Rogan. They did. There was a release from Judicial Watch showing that Pfizer was talking about Project Veritas. Joe Rogan is substantially larger than Project Veritas. So how much do you want to bet when someone's getting 200 and some odd million downloads per month, Joe Rogan, 11 million per episode, and he comes out with an episode with Robert Malone, which many people have claimed has reached 60 million downloads. I don't know if that's true, but I think it's entirely possible, to be completely honest, because that was a big cultural moment. You have to imagine that level of viewership is going to send a shockwave through this industry. They're going to see it in their bottom line. They're going to see it in policy. And these companies like Pfizer have a vested interest in vaccine mandates. And now we have a massive trucker protest. Why? Joe Rogan's influence. I know many people probably don't want to admit it, or the left would probably downplay that. And I got to point out as well, it seems like the guy who's most involved in this and the least involved in this is Joe Rogan himself. But I got to be honest, man. It's the biggest political and cultural show probably on the planet. I mean, maybe there's something else. I don't know. Maybe that's just my bubble. But when you look at Joe Rogan's episodes, and he does 4 per week, I believe, 11 million each, and then you look at primetime cable, and they can't get anywhere near that. They're getting 3 to 4. So he's getting double, triple their views, especially CNN. Joe Rogan owns the narrative. And so when you start seeing politicians back away from mandates, Pfizer's going, we are going to lose how much money because some dude who smokes pot is talking smack with some random dude? I ain't playing that. So I don't know for sure. But I'm saying there's a possibility, considering these companies are all connected, that, the Pfizer, the senior advisor over at Blackstone just said, look, guys, you have investments in these companies. We've got friends who work there. We're losing a lot of money over this Rogan guy. Is there anything we can do to get push back? I'm like, well, we do have a deal with Hypnosis. I mean, they've got access to big catalogs. Maybe we can put some pressure on Spotify. That is probably completely normal and probably happens all the time. At the highest levels of industry. This is the problem I have with I'm not a big fan of conspiracy theories, to be honest. I want to see evidence. The problem I have with the anti-conspiracy theory people is that they believe that at the top of industry is like 50 billion people. Okay, at least several million. At the tops of the Fortune 500 companies are 500 CEOs. I'm sure maybe some of these companies have co-CEOs. But even if you expand the board to include their C-suite, we're talking about the biggest companies in the world having a couple thousand people. They all know each other. So how hard is it for Blackstone, which has a piece of all of these different companies, to say, this Joe Rogan stuff is causing us problems? What about you, Hypnosis? Oh, yeah, let me call up the Hypnosis guy, see if we can put some pressure. It's 1 degree of separation. One. Blackstone, one company, Pfizer advisor, and media company that owns Neil Young's music. I do not think it is improbable. I mean, maybe it is not, I don't want to say I believe this absolutely happened. I'm just saying there's a strong possibility that behind the scenes, these big companies don't like the message. They don't like that it hurts their profits. So they push back. I mean, come on. They're activists who try to get right-wing personalities canceled, and the right-wing personalities muster up their support and push back. Why would Blackstone not do that? Why would Hypnosis not do that? Why would anybody who's worried about this not do it? Leverage whatever they could to push back and try and take down Joe Rogan. Let me show you how crazy this is. Tech Times. Spotify account guide. How to delete your account and cancel your premium subscription. You see, here's what happens. Whether it's an intentional coordinated campaign from the billionaire elites who don't like Joe Rogan and are concerned about their profits or not, or if it's just an organic movement from the left, which seems more likely, to be honest, because they're a chaotic and destructive force, once they push that sustained campaign, eventually capitalism takes hold. The Tech Times realizes there's a lot of people trying to figure out how to cancel Spotify accounts. Hey, let's make an article telling them how to do it so we can get a bunch of money. What happens is they write this article. The people then start sharing it as part of their movement. Tech Times generates ad revenue and gets a few $1,000s. This results in people actually canceling their Spotify accounts, exacerbating the crisis, and then Spotify is, forced into a position. Look at this. There comes a time when you want to switch to Apple Music. Here's what you need to know. And then it just basically breaks down how to cancel your Spotify account. But this story is from the 27th of January, 2022. They just wrote it. We know why they wrote it. It's crazy to me that there has been a multi-week-long campaign against Joe. And it's been longer than that, to be completely honest. Now they're coming after Joe Rogan for hosting Jordan Peterson. CNN. Scientists slam Joe Rogan's podcast episode with Jordan Peterson as absurd and dangerous. They go on to mention Canadian clinical psychologist Jordan Peterson in waffling remarks said there's no such thing as climate, right? He then went on to mock climate types, who he said typically suggest that climate is about everything. I almost feel like Joe's show needs like a media trainer or something like that. Like what I mean is something I am cognizant of when we do Timcast IRL, whether people in the audience realize it or not, is media manipulation, left-wing attack, psychology, etc. I used to hang out with a bunch of hackers, social engineering. So here's what would happen if we were doing Timcast IRL and the guest said, there's no such thing as climate, right? Now, to be honest, it's one of the reasons some people don't like the show. They say, Tim, you interrupt your guests too much. Well, I do it for this reason. If I was on the show with Jordan Peterson and he said there's no such thing as climate, he then went on to mock climate types, I'd say, what do you mean by that? Now, Joe does get adversarial sometimes, but I'd spot that immediately and be like, what do you mean there's no such thing as climate? Elaborate. And then when, he does, I'd make sure that that point was clarified to the best degree possible. What Jordan Peterson was saying is that when it comes to the discussion around climate change, people basically say that everything everywhere is related to climate, like, animal ecosystems, endangered species, all of this stuff. So it's not that he was saying there's no such thing as climate. That's a mischaracterization of his point. His point was climate is our entire ecosystem and planet. And how do you map for that? When you're doing science, you say climate is changing, but you use climate to refer to anything. That's the point he was making. That's the kind of stuff you got to be careful of, because what they do is they look for any point at which they can misrepresent. But to be fair, I can maybe talk big and say like, oh, I would have caught this. I try my best, and I think something like this I may have caught. But the reality is they get me out of context, same as everybody else. They manipulate same as everybody else. And at a certain point, you just got to recognize you can't take these people seriously. And CNN does show this. Peterson said, your models are based on everything. Your models are based on a set number of variables. So that means you've reduced the variables, which are everything, to that set. But how did you decide which set of variables to include in the equation if it's about everything? Then they go on to say, blah, 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 Spotify. This story is from yesterday night. Yesterday night, CNN writes this. The reason why I bring this up and the reason why I find myself talking about Joe again is that this is, I suppose, whether it's intentional or not, a sustained campaign to go after Joe Rogan's show, and rest assured, no one is invincible. It starts with 270 doctors. Then it turns out they weren't even doctors. Some of them were, but most of them weren't. It was like only 87 were practicing medicine. There's like a veterinarian and a dentist and a podcast and podcast hosts, more than one. So that narrative breaks down. They push another narrative. Now it's grown to 1,000 medical professionals and experts. And it's like, still, these people don't matter. Then they come out with the Jordan Peterson smear. They come out with the Neil Young smear. And when this starts bubbling up and becoming prominent among the left, you will get more Neil Young stories. They are trying to mount a serious pressure campaign to damage Spotify to hurt Joe Rogan's show. Now, look, I don't know, man. Maybe Joe Rogan doesn't need me to come to his defense. His show's substantially larger. It's like 20 times larger than my show. So there you go. So maybe it's kind of pointless for me to bring up, but I just think it's important, especially when I wake up and see these three trends on Twitter about canceling Spotify and blaming Spotify and all that stuff. Just like his show isn't invincible, but I'll say this. If Joe were to be kicked off of Spotify, what I think would happen is he would probably just go on Rumble or back on YouTube and just make more money. They'd have to pay him out. He'd have a strong lawsuit. They wouldn't want to do that. I'd be willing to bet that other companies would immediately be like, Joe, how much do you want? In fact, I'd be willing to bet that you would see So Rumble, they're looking at $400 million. If Joe Rogan ended his contract with Spotify, I would not be surprised if Rumble said, you know what? We needed this money for infrastructure, but we will put our entire creative budget into the Joe Rogan experience. I would absolutely not be surprised if that were the case. $100 million. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if they were like, yo, we'll give you $100 million for 1 year. Just give us 1 year. Because it's the biggest show in the world. When Joe was leaving iTunes, I said I thought that this was going to be bad for Joe. It was going to hurt him. Why? When people first explore podcasts, the first thing they would ever see was Joe Rogan Experience because he was number one. First in and best dressed is what they say. So because Joe had been doing this podcast for so long, it had grown in popularity. For one, Joe's talented. He's funny, obviously. And the show is really, really good. It's one of the best shows, period. But there are a lot of good podcasts that don't get nearly as big and they fight for that position. But when you are in the top position and new users keep coming in and seeing a show and the show is good, that's a recipe for success. Joe had the best real estate for any podcast show. The number one spot on iTunes, always there every time you open the app. On YouTube, he had constantly recommended videos because they were doing so well. When Joe walked away from that to do the exclusive deal with Spotify, Spotify is a substantially smaller platform for podcasting. I said it's probably going to hurt his audience size because he's getting a lot of natural pull from those platforms. Just like, Jim Acosta goes on CNN and gets 500,000 viewers, even though no one in their right mind would actually choose to watch the guy. Well, it's because people are watching CNN and he happens to be on it. Well, I should say I was wrong to a certain degree. I think I don't know how many views he was getting. I think he's getting more now on Spotify than he was before. I think it's gone up. I don't know why, but Joe said he had thought about it. He said it's gonna work out, and he was right. My understanding is that he used to get like 3 or 4 million. Actually, so let me clarify. He used to get, in my understanding, more viewership with his YouTube views and iTunes and Spotify. By going exclusive to Spotify, he's getting overall less, but more per podcast episode. So like a very large amount, which has podcast viewership is more influential, to be completely honest. By getting off of YouTube and going on Spotify, a good portion of those YouTube viewers went to Spotify as well. That's what Spotify was hoping. And though it may mean less viewership, the truth is YouTube viewership is worth 1/10 of a podcast view. No joke. I'm gonna be straight with you guys. When I do an ad read on YouTube, it can be several $1,000s. When I do an ad read on a podcast with 1/10 of the viewership, it can be tens of thousands of dollars. No joke. Now, to be honest, we only do, I think, like 6 ad reads per month. So it's not that much money, and they're YouTube ad reads. I do have podcast ad reads, but again, that's also like 3 or 4 per month. So it can be substantial, but I will also be completely honest with you guys. Timcast.com memberships is what makes all of this operate. If we lost all our ad revenue from our sponsors, I'd just be like, oh, it's not that much. The operation we run here, we have 30 plus employees. It's expensive. It is very, very, very expensive. We have a lot of people doing a lot of stuff. The point is, I think Joe knew the deal he was going to get with Spotify was big bucks, and I'm pretty sure he's keeping all the ad revenue. And ad revenue on Spotify is bigger. So think about what Joe must have been thinking. YouTube ad reads, not worth a whole lot. In fact, he probably was. I don't even know if he was doing YouTube ad reads. You move even 10% of you get 300,000 out of the 3 million on average who watched his YouTube version and send them to Spotify. He's going to be able to do way more ad reads. And we only get like 100,000 downloads per episode on IRL. And you can get, no joke, low tens of thousands for some of these ad reads. It's just way, way more money. So Joe was like, I may have less viewership, but it's going to be way, way better for the business. Anyway, I digress. If Joe were to leave Spotify, I believe he could easily take those viewers anywhere, including Rumble, and that would be one of the best things possible. So it may actually be that one of the best things that could happen is Joe does get taken down from Spotify and then announces he's going to be on Rumble, and Rumble pays him his $100 million. He keeps all the money. The viewership actually increases because now you've got a social media platform like Actually, that probably would be the best thing ever. So maybe it would be good. Hey, maybe the left should cancel Joe Rogan. I just hope that whatever happens, it works out for Joe. Joe does his thing unimpeded. And I just want to make sure that we continue to have an opposition to the ongoing smear campaign against him. Joe knows that, I support him, of course. It's a massive show. It's a massive opportunity. I'm eternally grateful for every opportunity Joe gave me to have on his show. But I also am deeply inspired by the work he does. He's an inspiration to the work that I do. When I do interviews, some people have said that, Timcast IRL, because I used to do these monologues principally as like my main content, the Tim Pool Daily Show on iTunes and Spotify. And then they were like, Tim made IRL to try and be like Joe Rogan. And that's just absolutely not true. The show is it's a different format. But to be fair, I am inspired by the work Joe did in doing Timcast IRL. Absolutely. A lot of what most podcasts have done are modeled off of the dude who's got the biggest show in the world when it comes to it. So I want to see his continued success. And I also think it's important for our culture and for our politics to have a dude. Look, I went on a rant last night about that Australian guy who smeared me. Joe defended me. I appreciate it. But Joe's willing to put that guy on a platform and give him several hours to speak his mind. Joe is not some sycophantic right-wing shill. He's doing real work. Man, some people have called him Walter Cronkite or Larry King. It's kind of crazy. But you see, the thing is, the establishment institutions have failed us. And that's the reality. Joe is a regular guy. He's a comedian. He's a celebrity. He's talented. He built up this platform and personality. And as someone who is somewhat just a regular guy, it speaks so much more to authenticity, to what people really want to hear. So go look at the iTunes charts. Last night, the 13th biggest podcast in the world was the Joe Rogan Experience Review podcast. Yeah, well, to be honest, in the past couple of weeks, that's basically what we've been doing. But no, let's be real. What do I do on this show and on Timcast IRL? Criticize the mainstream media. Criticize the New York Times and CNN when they put out lies and manipulation. When Joe Rogan's show has become the dominant platform for TV shows, it needs to be talked about. When Joe has people on who say bad things, when there's things to criticize, I will. I was critical of when he did the performance at Madison Square Garden with the vax mandate. There's not a whole lot to be critical of. I mean, I think I should, and anyone should be like, hey, man, if you're going to speak out about vax mandates, you shouldn't be doing these shows. But as I and many others pointed out, they sprung it on Joe at the last minute. He didn't agree to do the show with the vax mandate, and him and a bunch of other people have already said they wouldn't do it again. And so it's like, okay, look, I got to be honest. When I look at CNN, liars. When I look at Joe, a guy trying his best to be authentic. I hope that's the direction this country goes, to be honest. Authenticity, reality. Seems to be the case. But if it is going to be the case, it means that we have to speak up and for what we believe in and why we believe in it. Lend our support to shows like Joe Rogan's and, ask him just keep doing his thing. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 1 p.m. on this channel. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.